Hey, everybody, and welcome to Test with Ease, Deploy with Confidence, using Tugboat to reduce development risk. My name's Jonathan Daggerhart, and I'm the CEO and lead architect at Daggerhart Lab and a longtime Drupal and WordPress developer. Today, we're going to look at some common stressors related to development that may not seem obvious at first, but will certainly feel familiar to those of you who have been doing this for a long time. And we're going to look at a solution to these problems. So let's jump right in with a quick roadmap of where we're headed today. So we're going to cover six main areas in the next 45 minutes. First, we're going to talk about the problem and what a good solution might look like. Then we are going to go through some tugboat fundamentals, tugboat being one of the good solutions, so that we understand the core concepts and how it fits into your development workflow and how it helps solve the problems. After that, we're going to go to live demonstration. So this is going to be the bulk of our time, ideally, though the purpose of this demonstration is not to show exactly how to do every single part of Tugboat. It's more to illustrate how Tugboat does solve these common problems for development. Within the demo, we're going to look at the configuration of Tugboat, the essentials you'll likely need for setting up your own website or project with Tugboat, such as having environment secrets, as well as doing database seeding and file system transfers and things like that. We'll get into that. Don't worry about it. And at the end, we'll look at a complete workflow. Exactly, we'll show it solving the problems that we identify as a part of the demonstration. And at the end, we'll do a quick review where we just sort of recap what we learned and some resources for you to get started. My goal is that by the time we're done, you'll understand not just what Tugboat does, but whether it's something that could actually help your team. If it is, you'll know exactly how to get started. Perfect. This is a practical session, so fewer slides, more demo, ideally. I want you to see this tool working, not just hear me talk about it. All right, so let's jump right into exactly what problems we are here to solve. So, problem number one. Let's start by talking about a problem that many of you have likely experienced. So, here's a common scenario: a critical bug gets reported in production. So, you need to fix it right now, and you've got a fix ready in one of your Git branches, and you're ready to deploy it. But somewhere, someone else is making use of the environments that are between development and production. So, a minor step back, it's really common for hosts out there to offer some additional environments for testing your website, aside from just the production one. And often those environments live sort of in the deployment pipeline to production. So here we are, we have a bug we want to fix, and someone else is making use of this testing environment that's a part of our deployment pipeline. So what do? Do you wait? You deploy the fix untested, hope it works because you didn't have a chance to review it with someone else in a shared staging environment? Or do you tell them you're dumping their staging environment and you're just going to take it over? Essentially, this is the testing environment bottleneck. So some of you might be thinking, well, our host company provides additional environments. Like we have a dev environment and a test and a stage environment, and we can even have other environments that we spin up for special cases. Well, that's great, but here's the thing. Those are still shared environments. And fundamentally, you're limited to the set number of environments that the host will either give you or that your account can sort of support. And the reason for that is because your host isn't in the business of providing lots of environments. It is in the business of providing you one important environment, production. So, with a limited number of these testing environments, you end up with a lot of very real problems that show up quite often in projects. For example, developers literally waiting in line to access the environments for testing their changes or for demonstrating those changes to someone. You can't test or demonstrate multiple features at the same time because there's only one specific set aside testing space for that. Large projects monopolize these environments for weeks at a time, such as like major upgrades or rethemes, things like that. And your workflow gets blocked by someone else's work because they needed to use that environment to demonstrate or to test something. So it's not just inconvenient. It literally slows down the entire development process and creates a lot of stress when you need to move quickly, as well as creates a lot of redundant, unnecessary work, such as like removing some feature from an environment so you can put another one there, only to remove that feature so that you can put the original back up for further QA or testing. So that's problem number one, the bottleneck. Let's look at problem number two. Second major problem is about what happens when you can't easily share your work and get feedback. So consider this scenario. You've been working on a new feature for a client, you've tested it locally, everything looks good, so you merge it. The feature goes to production and the client sees it for the very first time. They look at it and they say, that's not what I wanted. I'm sure some of you have experienced this before. I certainly have, and this is not an ideal scenario. So now we're in a situation where we have to redo the work. The client is frustrated because they feel like they paid for something they didn't want. And you're wondering how this could have been avoided. Well, the answer is they need to see this work before it got merged, before it got so far as to be the waste that they imagined. But there was no real easy way to show them because if you are in a if you're in a hosting environment in which the development or testing environments are a part of the deployment pipeline, well, then you certainly can't or don't want to merge untested, unreviewed features into your deployment pipeline, potentially clogging that deployment pipeline for the sake of testing something that's unapproved, right? So this is a collaboration problem, and it often can lead to risky deployments. So when you can't easily share working code, it is hard to get feedback before merging. Your team can review your code, but you can't actually see it running with real data, or you're expecting that your team member spins up your changes on their local to test it that way, or you even come up with some sort of let's hop on a call and I'll screen share type scenario, which is also sort of like wasteful of time and inefficient. And it just doesn't feel good to have to do that for testing a new feature or a bug fix. Additionally, your clients can't review these changes easily because of the exact same reason why your teammates can. Well, they certainly don't have a local, and you don't really want to set up a call with your client to show them a screen share with your local. So it's just not ideal. And so you end up with code that goes relatively untested by other team members because there's no easy, convenient way for the code to be tested. And it actually ends up as a part of your deployment. And you end up in a risky deployment because your code is untested, unreviewed from sort of the experience, the practical side of things. So often you just hope it works. And it's not the way any of us want to work because it doesn't feel good, right? Like these problems of risky deployments cause stress, and this is not the way that we want to be working. So how many of you have merged something and felt that little knot in your stomach wondering, is this going to break something else? Is there a part I didn't look at? That anxiety comes from not having a safe way to test or validate the changes before they reach production, or for another team member or for a client to review that work before it goes live. So we have two big problems now. We've got the bottleneck that slows us down, and we've got risky deployments that stress us out. Okay, but what if we could solve both of these problems? What would that look like? So imagine a better workflow. We've identified the problems. Now let's think about what would actually solve them. Okay, so what if we could give every developer their own testing environment? Sure. Not a shared staging environment that everyone fights over, but an actual dedicated space for each person's work. Yeah, that sounds pretty nice. One environment per developer. Okay, that's decent. Well, what if you could review and test multiple features simultaneously without blocking anything at all? Suddenly, your urgent bug fix doesn't have to wait for someone else's epic to be finished, and everything can happen in parallel. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so now we're talking about environments per feature. That's a good idea. What if you could share your work instantly with other developers, the QA team, the client? No complicated, like not a complicated setup. Not let me make a new server or whatever. No, let's hop on a call and screen share. No, let me walk over to your desk if for some reason you're still working in person. You literally just like, what I want to do is I want to be able to just send a URL to somebody that shows my special code that's unmerged, that it's not deployed, and they can like fully test it. That's an ideal scenario. Okay, that sounds great. What if we could get, so now that we can send somebody a URL with this, with our working changes, then we can get approval. We can get somebody, we can get eyes on our actual changes, how they work, not just the code behind those changes, but we can have somebody like clicking through, logging in to the website, testing these changes out, and actually seeing the feature work or the bug being fixed in a real environment. So with real interactions, not just screenshots. Like all of these ways that we've gotten around not being able to share simple changes, the practical outcomes of simple changes with people, such as screenshots or hopping on a call, right? Like we want people to actually test this change. And what if you could deploy confidently, right? Okay, so also what I want to know is that like this change hasn't really caused any problems with the deployment. So I've made this change and its deployment has also been somewhat tested, right? So in the world of Drupal, you've got a few steps that are a part of each deployment, such as config import, maybe you've got hook updates, you've got cache clears, you've got your assets being built, your theme assets being built, and any number of things that are part of each deployment that all have to go right for the deployment to succeed. So what if we can verify that that is also working with each and every one of our changes so that we don't have to question that once we merge and that code moves forward towards production, that the actual steps of deployment will work. That sounds great. I want to do that as well. These are all included in our ideal scenario, our ideal solution. Okay, so what would make this possible? So if we could have an environment spun up for each change, an environment that tests the deployment steps, that we get that provides a real live working URL that we can share with other people, and is not in the way of the deployment pipeline, not in the deployment pipeline in any way, then that would solve our problem. That would reduce the risk by making it easy to share and validate the work before it gets merged. So before it's even in the deployment pipeline whatsoever. So how do we make that happen? Well, okay, so luckily I didn't imagine all of this for the very first time, and this is actually what it is that Tugboat provides. So let's talk about Tugboat. So Tugboat is a service that creates isolated live preview instances for our application website automatically for each and every pull request, or we can spin up an instance for any arbitrary branch or tag that's a part of our Git repository. So what's it mean in practice? It means that every time we open a PR, Tugboat spins up a complete working version of our website with the code that's included in that PR. It's not a screenshot. It's not a mock-up. We don't have to hop on a call to do a screen share. It's a real, actual functioning copy of the website or application that people can actually use. So this is how Tugboat enables everything we just talked about. You can test multiple changes simultaneously without blocking deployment whatsoever because this is pre-merge in our development workflow. Every PR has its own environment, so we can have 5 different features being tested at the same time, and nobody's waiting and nobody's blocked. Second, we can share work previews with our team and clients instantly for very quick feedback if everybody is on task, right? So each preview has a unique URL. All we got to do is copy and paste that URL into Slack or an email, and boom, our clients have an actual working copy of the site. They can log in with their credentials. They can test everything as if it was as if it was their website. So they can click around, give feedback while we're still in development before anything's merged whatsoever. And this opportunity for quick feedback is what can prevent us from going down a wrong path of development as well. So in that scenario where we talked about, you show your client the feature they asked for the very first time, and they say, that's not what I was expecting. Well, in this scenario, you can very easily show them a work in progress and get feedback as you progress, not at the very end after you've taken some code live. This is the solution to both the problems we talked about. The bottleneck gone, everybody has their own environment. Actually, every feature, every bug, every change has its own environment. Risky deployment solved because everything gets tested and reviewed before it gets merged, before it reaches our deployment pipeline. So now, before we jump right into a live demo, I'm going to show you a working application with Tugboat set up, and we're going to go through some scenarios where we make use of its features just to really bring home how valuable it is. And this is something I've used every day at my work for years now, and it's really hard to imagine working without such a feature. So let's take a look at how it's going to actually fit into a workflow. Here's a quick overview of the core concepts and how it's going to look within our workflow. You may see some unfamiliar terminology here, but don't worry too much about memorizing that right now. I'll show you what that means in the context during the demo. It'll make way more sense later. But the key thing to understand is the Tugboat has a simple organizational structure that connects to your Git repository. The important concept is how Tugboat solves the two problems we've been talking about. First, it creates multiple isolated environments. Every pull request or branch or tag, if you choose, can get its own preview. This means you can work on the multiple features simultaneously. There's no waiting, no blocking. That epic your team member's been working on, it has its own environment. Your bug fix has its own environment. They don't need to interfere with each other at all. So in this scenario we talked about earlier, the critical production bug where someone is testing a big feature and they've got that big feature being tested in the staging environment that's sort of like a part of your deployment pipeline or your only staging environment. With Tugboat, that's not a problem anymore. You open a PR for your bug fix, Tugboat automatically spins up a preview environment. You test it there, you're done. Also, your teammates' work is in its own preview environment and is no longer a part of your deployment pipeline. It's no longer clogging deployments, nor is it monopolizing the only staging environment you have. Essentially, you don't have a single staging environment anymore. You have a preview environment for each and every change you want to make. Second, Tugboat makes getting feedback super simple, right? So every single preview has a live URL, and all you have to do is share that with somebody. It can be your team member who is going to test or QA the work for you. It can be your client who is going to review and approve the work before it gets merged, long before it reaches production. It's now no longer necessary to set up a call where we do a screen share or anything like that. In fact, because each preview, each environment gets its own URL, you can make use of this for illustrating a bug to someone. There's a lot of uses for having a unique environment per change. Not only that, but anybody who's making use of this preview is looking at real working code, and the code has been sort of test deployed because each instance spins up a new copy of the website and has essentially deployed your code to that preview instance is what I'm talking about. So remember the scenario where the client sees the feature in production. It's like, that's not what I wanted. Well, we'll talk about the client sees it before it's merged. I think I probably already said that, but that's such a powerful thing that we have essentially moved where QA happens, where testing and QA happens in our workflow to before the merge of our code. That's the big picture here. So this is what makes preview environments fundamentally different from traditional staging and testing environments. It's not just another environment. It's a different paradigm. It's unlimited environments that come and go as needed and are always aligned with the work that's being done, the change that's happening on that branch or in that PR. So that's the concept. Okay, so now let me show you what it looks like in your actual development pipeline. And we're going to go through some step-by-step workflow, and then we'll get on to the demonstration. So this is the workflow you'll be using day to day. And it's not very different from what you may do today. You can see I've actually illustrated at the bottom of this slide both what we're doing, what you may be doing today, and what you do differently with Tugboat, and the differences are somewhat minor but impactful. So step one, developer creates a branch and opens a PR. This is a normal get workflow. Nothing's changed here. Now, in a world once we have incorporated Tugboat, at that point, immediately, Tugboat automatically builds a preview environment for that PR. Tugboat sees the PR through a webhook and just spins up a copy of the site with your code changes. You don't have to do anything. It just happens every single time. And it's a complete instance. We'll see that in the demonstration. So you don't have to worry about it being some sort of approximation. It actually is a copy of the website. Step three, the team tests and reviews and approves the changes all within the PR. Either the code review happens on your PR, which is normal. That's what's happening today. And the QA now happens on the Tugboat instance, or your teammate is testing the change on the Tugboat instance, which I'm basically using interchangeably with the word QA. And then after everybody approves that this is what we want, this is how it should work, then you merge and we reach deployment. And you can see at the bottom how before using Tugboat, or without these preview instances, without this paradigm and thinking of I want an environment for every single change, then you end up with this scenario where your test and staging environments are singular and they're often as a part of the deployment pipeline. So often you're merging code before it gets to QA, before someone can see it working, right? But with Tugboat, all we've done is we've switched these steps. So since a Tugboat preview environment spins up for each PR, then the code review still happens on that PR, but we can QA, we can test, verify, approve everything before the merge, before the deployment pipeline. That's the main difference in using Tugboat as a part of your development workflow and not, essentially. Okay, so next up is we are going to hop into a live demonstration. What that's going to look like is I have a code repository set up, a relatively simple WordPress site. I'm using GitHub for the repo. I have asset compilation because in any real world, your theme will compile its assets. It will build the JavaScript and the Sass and things like that. So I wanted to show that, how that works in Tugboat, or just essentially how you can set it up to do that in Tugboat. I have environment seeding. So in the real world, you're going to want to work with an existing database and an existing file system. Because the alternative is you have a blank website. And that's not what we want. What we want is a copy of the website that's as close as possible. During the demonstration, I'm going to create and configure a Tugboat project somewhat from scratch. I'm not going to go into too much detail about exactly how each and every step I took to make this work with a WordPress site, or how I might do it with a Drupal site differently, or things like that. But we will look at the configuration and talk about the different sections of it and sort of just become somewhat comfortable with what it would take to configure your site to work with Tugboat. Then we are going to start building preview environments. We're going to look at how you can add secrets to Tugboat so that you don't have to have those as a part of your code base. And we're going to do a couple real world examples where we create previews as a part of the development workflow. All right, so let's hop right in. So here we are looking at my Tugboat example repo that I'm going to use for this demonstration. And here's a quick overview of what we're going to cover in this demo. Some of it is tutorial-like, but hopefully we get relatively quickly down to demoing different pull requests and how preview environments are created automatically, or how I can create them arbitrarily based on tags and branches and things like that. But I did want to give some sense of a tutorial for just sort of getting started with Tugboat. So pretty quickly, let's go through this. As I mentioned in the previous slide, what we have here is a simple WordPress site where I have the site set up in this, the doc root is set up inside of this web folder, and inside of the themes folder, I have a custom theme, my custom theme. There it is. I have my repo set up here, which we're going to look at as we set up Tugboat just to see what it's doing. Over here, I have my code base in case there are changes I want to make as a part of this demonstration. And down here, I've got my command line tool. So we're all ready to go to get this set up. first thing we are going to do is we're going to visit tugboatqa.com. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at my site just so that we know what to expect. Here it is. It's a very simple WordPress site that is about a bakery. And this is my local development environment. And I don't have a production environment because this demo won't demonstrate deploying to production in any way. It's just primarily going to demonstrate the development workflow with pull request. But this is what we expect to see when we spin up Tugboat preview images. And here I have the tugboatqa.com website, which is what we'll use to get started. So the very first thing I want to do is I want to sign into Tugboat and create a new project. So I'm going to click sign in here, and I'm going to just sign in with GitHub, which is how I normally do it. And we'll see that I've got some other stuff here, but for the sake of this demonstration, we're just going to create a new project so that you see it from scratch. So I'm going to create a new project here, and it'll ask me for my project name, and I'm just going to call this Tugboat Example Demo WordPress. Sure, that's a great name for a project. So before I go any further, let's talk about what a project is in Tugboat. A project is a billing entity. So a project can have any number of repos underneath it, and all of the costs related to those repos are billed under this one project. So the equivalent of that in like GitHub would be an organization. For the sake of Tugboat, that is a project. So I'm going to create a Tugboat project. This is making me choose my first repository within my project, but a project can have more than one repository. We also see the choose your pricing, and I'm just going to start with free, and that should be sufficient for the sake of this demo. All right, so it has created for me a project. Here is this top. If I look at the breadcrumbs up here, we can see that we are in the project of Tugboat Example Demo WordPress. And inside of that project, I have one repository. If I go back up, so this is viewing Tugboat at the project level or the organization level, the billing entity level. And inside of this, I have this project's repositories. A project level settings tend to deal with the users and the billing aspect of the project. And that's basically about it for project level settings. And when we get into a repository, different repositories have their own repository settings. So the first thing we see up here at the top is that it's a warning message saying that this repository is missing a base preview. We're going to come back to that. Don't worry. All right, but it does appear to have successfully connected to my Git repository. And we can go look on the other side, on the Git side of this, just to verify that it is all set up. So if I go to my Git repository and I go to settings and I go to webhooks, we'll see that there's a new webhook set up here for Tugboat. By adding this repository to a project in Tugboat, it automatically created this webhook for me. This webhook is what will react to new pull requests and create new preview images for us, instances for us. So let's go back over here to Tugboat and let's take a look around at the repository level where we'll be spending the rest of the time. If I scroll down, we see that I don't have any previews yet. And I don't have, as far as what is available to build, I don't have any pull requests because there's no open pull request in my Git project. Nothing there. And I won't have any tags I can build, but I will have branches because my GitHub repository always has at least one branch, and that branch is main. So from the very beginning, I could go ahead and build this main branch preview, and that's what I'll do after we complete exploring this repository. So it's telling me also there's some statistic about this repository, so such as how much space it's taking up and how long it takes to build and some things like that. That's pretty nice and useful. And if I scroll back up here to the top, there's this repository settings area. And this is where I can choose some pretty simple options for the repository itself, such as, do we want it to build pull requests automatically? Yes. Yeah, we do for the sake of this demo. And yeah, why not go ahead and build draft pull requests as well? Also, rebuild pull requests as they're updated, delete pull requests when they are merged. Yep, all of these are sort of just some settings. And I won't go over all of these, but I mainly want to illustrate that there are some reasonable and useful settings in here. You can automatically refresh previews at certain times, things like that. Additionally, here are the environment variables. So this is where I can set secrets for this repository that will be available in each preview instance. So for example, as a part of this work, we are going to seed the database of each of our instances with a copy of productions database. This is an example, as well as a copy of productions file system. This is where I would set whatever secrets, such as passwords or keys, needed for those types of things, or API keys, things like that. It's all available right here. All right, so let's scroll back up to the top and let's go back to the list of branches. So the very first thing I want to do is I want to build my main branch, or in some cases, for some repositories, this may be your develop branch. I want to go ahead and build this as a preview, and I'm going to set this up as our base preview. Doing that will allow future previews to spin up faster. We'll look at that more. But so I'm just going to go to branches, find my main branch or develop branch, and click build preview. So I can go ahead and assure you that this is not going to work on the first try because I have not provided certain secrets it needs, but I want to show you what it looks like while it's building. Then I will fix it so that it will work, and then we'll watch it build from there. Though I will be editing out a lot of this for the sake of this video. So here it goes. What we're going to see here is that it runs a series of commands for building this website. And these commands are actually controlled by me. So the very first thing it tried to do was curl the URL for our example backup database, or one of the early things it tried to do. And it was unable to do so because I've not yet provided this environment variable. So where do these commands come from? How does it know what to do is a reasonable question to ask. So I'm going to go over here to my code editor, and the way that you configure Tugboat to build your website is that your repository has a .tugboat folder, and within that folder we have a config.yaml file. So we're going to take a look at this real quick. And I want to just reiterate that this is not a tutorial for how to actually write this YAML file from scratch, but we will look around at it so that you get a sense of familiarity with what you would expect to do yourself. So a quick overview of this YAML file is that at the top level, you're defining different services for your web host, right? Essentially, we are configuring Tugboat to host our website. The way that I have this set up is I have two services, one for my MySQL database and one for PHP, which is sort of the webhead itself, the web service. The more simple of the two is the MySQL service. So let's open that up and take a look at how that's built. So the MySQL service, every service consists of an image. That is the Docker image that this service is built with. And then commands that are broken up into three stages. The init stage is just the preparing this server for my work. And I've got a little thing that I commonly do here, which is to replace shell with bash, which is just a nice to have. And this is an array of server commands. So command line commands. Essentially, we are running code with YAML. At the moment, for the MySQL service, the only thing we're really doing that's important is we're downloading a copy of the production database, and we are restoring it to the MySQL database server on this MySQL service. For PHP, it's pretty much the same. There are a few minor differences. So we tell it which image to use. We say that this is the default, which just means that the URL that you'll get provided for this website that it's building will default to this PHP service. This depends on MySQL, so wait until the MySQL service, wait until this completes before building this one. reasonable. And then we have commands that have the same three stages that the MySQL service has. We have initialization, which is sort of setting up our server, preparing it with all of the dependencies and customizations we need to run our website. After the initialization step, there's the update step, which is where I'm going to restore our site's file system. So in the case of WordPress, it's the uploads folder. And then we have the build step, which is where we are going to compile the themes assets. This whole thing all said and done is what Tugboat is doing when it is building our site. And you can even see, like, I am echoing out this MySQL step update, and that command is coming from here in the file that I've placed in this repo. So let's go ahead and fix this by going to the repository settings and adding our secrets. So I'm just going to import those from a JSON file that I have created. There we have it. So I have created our environment variables that are just URLs to these temporary backups I've created. But if you needed more for like API keys, you would just add them one at a time. And then each time your site builds, these environment variables are available to each instance. So now that we've added this, I can go back into my preview, which previously failed, and I can go to these actions at the top and tell it to rebuild. And this time I would expect it to succeed in the build. Okay, there we have it. It has completed, and now it is committing and saving this build. And once it's done so, the status of each of my containers will become ready, and I'll be able to preview this instance. Clicking preview. And here we have a working copy of my website with my custom database, my custom files, and it is at this unique URL, which should be pretty hard to guess, but very easy to share. Those are the basics of setting up Tugboat. Okay, what is left on our agenda? So we have signed into Tugboat. We created a new project, which is the billing entity, the organization level. We've added this repository. We looked around at some options. We set some secrets, and we created our first preview. So let's go see if we can resolve this warning at the top. This repository is missing a base preview. Having a base preview is recommended, and it will speed up build times. Okay, so what a base preview is basically a snapshot of this repository after it's been built, where future PRs will start from. So for example, right now, if I were to create a new pull request, it will build that preview from scratch. And that means that that preview will take 3 gigabytes and about 4 minutes to build. But if I set this preview as the base preview by going to the settings for this preview, and I'm going to set it as the base preview for the entire repository. Now, as Tugboat builds the next preview, it's going to start from this one, and it'll only do the differences between the change I make in my pull request and this one. So it'll be much faster and it'll take up much less space. So let's take a look at creating our first pull request. If I go back over to the Tugboat, to this example repository, I see that I've got 2 issues that's going to represent the development work that I have to do on this site. So one is a big task, which is to perform a major upgrade of all systems and thoroughly test it. So that's a big one. That's the type of task that is, in our example, would cause a bottleneck in the staging environment. So in the example where we found a production bug, but there was a bottleneck, this is the type of task that would cause a bottleneck. And we've also got kind of a simple one called put a red border around some divs. So why don't we start with that one? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new branch called for this work. I'm going to create a new branch for this work. And then I'm going to make a few changes, and I'm going to submit those changes as a pull request to this repository. And then we'll watch as Tugboat automatically builds a new instance specifically for that pull request. So let's do that pretty quickly. I'm going to, we're just going to call this number 2 and red border. Right. go into my theme, and I'm just going to find my SAS file, which I've done almost nothing yet, but we're going to find something to add a red border to. So let's just inspect this and see if we can achieve this real quick. All right, then I'm going to verify that this works on my local. Great. So there we have it. This is the change that is necessary to complete the ticket of work. And now I'm going to go ahead and push this up and submit a pull request. All right. So let's go ahead and open up this pull request. I don't need much in the form of a message as we're just demonstrating this. And now I've created the pull request, and we can see that Tugboat has already started. And from here, I can actually even click through to this to watch Tugboat build this pull request. So let's see how long this takes and how much space it ends up taking up by the end of it. All right, so that has basically completed and it is committing, and we should be able to preview this site pretty quickly. I'm going to go ahead and click through to the preview link for this instance. And once it's completely ready, it will refresh for me. And there it is. So we have one instance of my site that's specifically for this pull request. And we have another instance of the site that is, let's see, there it is, that is our main branch. And each of them can live as long as they need to live. So this ticket is done. Now what I would do is I would say, let's send this to QA. Here's a link. All right, so we're going to pass that ticket along. And now I'm going to go back and work on a different ticket while somebody else is QAing that. Well, let's see what else we have here. Now we've got this major upgrade ticket. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to check out my main branch. And I'm going to start a new branch for this work. And now I will perform an upgrade of some sort. All right, here I am on my local. And it looks like I do have one update. That's going to be useful. So I'm going to go ahead and update these plugins, and this work will represent the major upgrade that I am performing for the sake of this task. All right, so now my site is completely up to date. I'm just going to go ahead and add everything and commit it, and let's submit a pull request for this. So this is a new pull request, so it gets its own tugboat. Let's go watch this one build. All right, so this one is complete and committing. And we should see that now we have a third instance. We now have an instance for just this pull request that contains a major upgrade. And so this illustrates how you can be working on a long-term ticket that's got a lot of work involved. And since you get a preview environment for each pull request before you merge and send to your host, and avoiding their staging environments and testing environments. This can take as long as it needs, and it's not in the way of anything else. So since this pull request started from the main branch, it doesn't have the change, the different line border. It doesn't have the red border change as the previous PR we committed. So each PR getting its own separate environment allows all of your work to get more complete and become more tested before you ever merge. Let's go back to Tugboat and take a look at the difference now that we've spun up 3 different environments. So here I'm back at the repository level of Tugboat, and we can see that I have my main preview that's a base, and it takes up 3 gigabytes, and it took 4.5 minutes to build, whereas my other previews are each taking up about 90 megabytes and took about 1 minute to build. The reason being is because this preview image is built on top of the base preview. And so all Tugboat has to store is the difference between those images. And that's really highlighting the value of the base preview. Let's see what happens when we merge our PRs. So we've got an instance per PR. We can spin up an instance for any arbitrary branch and any arbitrary tag. You can even use this to go back in time. For example, if you need to see how the website looked a few months ago, you could check out an old branch or an old tag. That's incredibly useful. The next thing we want to witness is that when we merge these PRs, these previews are removed automatically. Let's go back to the Git repository and let's take a look at our PRs, and let's say that we are accepting the work of the red border. I'm going to go ahead and merge this PR, and we'll see that the preview instance for it will get removed automatically from Tugboat. There it is. Now it's gone. And the same's true for the major upgrade. So as soon as I close or merge this PR, Tugboat will remove that image as well. And we just continue on with this process. I hope this helped illustrate the value of Tugboat, really the value of the paradigm of having an instance per pull request. Also, I keep wanting to highlight that it's not just per pull request, but also you can spin up a preview image per branch or tag, really arbitrarily. Okay, so let's take a moment to remember why this matters, right? So at the very beginning, we talked about two major pain points that many development teams face, especially smaller development teams, or when working alone is a small development team. First, it's the bottleneck of shared testing environments where everybody is waiting in line, or in the case of working alone, each of your different lines of work, each of your different PRs or branches are waiting in line to make use of the staging environment. Second is the stress and the risk of deploying code that hasn't been properly tested or reviewed. As I hope this demonstration illustrated, preview environments per PR fundamentally solve both of these problems. With Tugboat, every developer gets their own isolated environment. Every PR actually gets their own isolated environment. Every branch can have its own isolated environment. So you're not waiting on anyone. You're not blocking anybody. That epic that you've been working on for weeks, no problem. Take the time you need. You have your own environment. That bug fix you need to get into production quickly, no problem. You're going to have your own environment. You can get it tested and improved very quickly. Everybody in every instance of work gets to move independently at its own pace and does not block the other. It's great. So no more Slack messages if you're working with a small team saying like, can I use this environment? No more project managers asking why something is taking so long when the answer is like, oh, I don't have anywhere to test it. I can't like get this up on the test environment, things like that. And just as importantly, every single change gets tested in a real environment before it goes to production. And also, since each environment is sort of built per PR, you're testing the deployment of that change. As long as your Tugboat configuration is set up to somewhat mimic a deployment in that you perform the steps necessary for a deployment to succeed as a part of your Tugboat configuration, then each of your changes is testing to some degree the deployment of that work. So you're verifying that this change doesn't break the processes that are necessary for deployment. And if it does, you catch it early and you fix it before it's ever merged. It's great. So let's call back to that scenario we talked about where the client sees a feature in production and says, that's not what I wanted. Well, with the preview environment, that doesn't happen either because your PR, as soon as you submitted it, even early during the feature development, you don't have to wait till it's done, has a URL that you can send to the client and you can show status update. You can ask questions where they can look at your progress instead of worrying about screenshots and mock-ups and other ways that we sort of work around not being able to share copies of the website, working copies of the website. The client will be able to see it, interact with it, and approve it long before your work goes too far in the wrong direction. So the result is the work that you deploy, you can deploy more confidently. It's had more eyes on it. You've been able to ask questions about it in a very practical, useful way. You've tested your changes with the actual deployment steps that mirror those that your deployment goes through. This makes a huge difference in how you feel about your work every day. I can't necessarily express that enough. And I hope that that is coming across here is that the confidence you get in being able to just quickly share your work to get approval, to get it tested, and to spin it up and watch it sort of perform a deployment successfully is hard to oversell. You stop worrying about whether your code is going to break something. You stop feeling that knot in your stomach when you hit the merge button. You know it's going to be fine because you've already seen it working. Other people have already tested it. The client's already approved it if that is a part of your workflow. So where do you want to go from here? That's the question. So let's take a look at some resources and what your next steps might be. So to get started, here are some resources that'll be helpful. First of all, you can start with a free trial. That's what I would recommend, especially if you have a small project you can use as a way to learn. For example, your personal or business website is a great way to dip your toes in the tugboat and get used to it and get value out of it pretty quickly. And I am just realizing I probably should have stated this earlier, but I'm in no way affiliated with Tugboat, nor am I being paid to promote this service. I just really love it. Okay, carrying on. Here's a couple links to some documentation. They've also got a great Slack channel where they provide great help, and the community itself will also jump in and start helping. The documentation is full of examples, so that's a great place to start. They also have a video on their YouTube channel that's more about the getting started, where the configuration is illustrated a little more in depth than what we were able to get into here. And thank you very much. I hope this has been good. I hope this has illustrated how you can reduce some of your development stress, especially along the lines of deployment and getting more of your code tested in front of more eyes. If you have any questions about this presentation, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to do what I can to help answer anything. And if you have any questions or you want to learn more about Tugboat, I highly recommend the Slack. I hope everybody has a great rest of your conference.